off and then give us some opening remarks on behalf of CDRI.
Thank you, Savina. Very good afternoon to all of you. I'm Ranjini Mukherjee. I work as the Director, Research, Knowledge Management and Capacity Development and CDRI. It gives me an immense pleasure to be here today in this session, and thank you, Savina, for inviting us. I have been asked to give some opening remarks. So I know it's going to be a very interesting conversation that will take place in the next 75 minutes. But we, as CDRI, which is the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, we are an international organization having more than 51 countries as our members. You can see this is our pavilion. And we work towards building resilience of infrastructure. And the framework that we use when we talk about resilient infrastructure is the infrastructure which has the capacity to absorb, respond, and recover. And when we say that at every stage, we try to also, we keep on advocating about how to make it inclusive, gender and social inclusive. So when we work on housing, we try to look at the GEDSI elements. When we work on schools, we try to look at the GEDSI element. When we work on hospitals, we try to look at the GEDSI element. Now to us, if the infrastructure at the end of the day is meant for people and for community, and if the communities don't benefit from the services that infrastructure provide, that infrastructure is not resilient. And a resilient infrastructure has to be gender and socially inclusive. Therefore, when we talk about infrastructure's capacity to absorb, so if a school is designed and if the school is not designed keeping in mind the need of the people with disability, it is not a resilient infrastructure. When it comes to respond, if the water ministry after a disaster is responding by providing, water trucks, sending trucks to provide water to the affected community, and if it does not take into account the needs of the vulnerable women and the disabled people, it is not a resilient infrastructure delivery, service delivery. And similarly, when we build back, if we don't take into account the needs of the communities who are vulnerable, the needs of the people with disability, then we don't build back in a resilient manner. So that's the common framework we use. We are very happy to partner with ICSI in developing this fourth report of the climate resilient infrastructure report, the fourth series, which focuses on GEDSI. And I am looking forward to a very interesting conversation, and really looking forward to listening to all of you and your interesting insights. So with that, let me thank Savina once again, and I hand over the floor.
Thank you so much, Ranjini, for setting up the conversation today. Next slide, please. Okay, that's me. I should have started by saying who I am, right? So I'm Savina Carluccio. I'm the Executive Director of the International Coalition for Sustainable Infrastructure, which is a mouthful, or ICSI. We have been, over the past 12 months, collating, curating, talking to quite a lot of different organizations, because we wanted to, this year, as we're doing now every year for the past 3 years, so we've been publishing what we call the Climate Resilient Infrastructure Report. And this year we initially focused on implementation quite broadly. Then we did a focus on nature, an edition on technology, and this year the edition is on gender equality, disability, and social inclusion. We had an open call for contributions. Many of you actually I can see in the audience have contributed to the report. Report curates and collates case studies, but also knowledge resources and for action and capacity building, and also a number of initiatives that are working in this space. So it gives me great pleasure to announce now the launch of this report that has been co-authored with CDRI. Thank you, CDRI, for all your support in getting this publication out of the door this year, as well as support from the Global Covenant of Mayors. So thank you for this. So as I said, this report is very much practitioner focused. So something that really is meant to inspire and provide examples of what is already currently being done. And what we have been trying to do is curate this year's publication with something in mind, which is considering the nexus of infrastructure, climate, disaster risk reduction, and gender equality, disability, and social inclusion. And this nexus is perhaps a little bit less explored as a whole than climate and GEDSI, infrastructure and GEDSI. So we kind of wanted to make the point that we need to be looking this as a nexus if we really want to build infrastructure for all. So yes, the QR code is there, and I hope please share with your networks. This report actually does quite well every year because people are actually now we've got a fan base that expects this report to come out every year. So yeah, thank you very much for your contributions, and we hope that this is useful as the previous editions. So now today is a quite simple format. We've got a panel discussion, and I'm moderating this panel. And so I'd like to now invite on the stage my panelists. So I'll just start with Dr. Sanae Okamoto. Please join me on the stage, Sanae. She's a senior researcher of the UN University Merit Institute. She'll tell you a little bit more about herself and the work that she does that is relevant to the topic today. Nwamarah. I hope I haven't really done a disservice to your surname too much. And she's head and advisor climate change and Commonwealth Secretariat. Welcome, Uzo. Bala Nagendran. He's including climate researcher at the Global Disability Innovation Hub. I'll move because I'll get the rest of the panelists on that side. I welcome Marcia Toledo. She's director Adaptation and Resilience, the Climate High-Level Champions Team. And then Ula Kasperek. Welcome, Ula. And she's head of CHAMP. She'll tell you a little bit more what CHAMP is. National Engagement, C40, and GCoM, Global Covenant of Mayors Joint Program. So welcome to all panelists. I might actually sit on this side because their screen is still there. And I know that we want to be looking at the screen at some point. And so thank you very much for joining us today. We've got a number of questions for you. Is there a microphone? Yes, perfect. Okay, so right. So let's get started. Please, when you start speaking, introduce, well, if you want to say a little bit more about yourself, the work that you do, please feel free. And also, as much as you can, make examples, give, something a bit tangible for people to just, from the audience, to take away from today's discussion. Okay, so right, we will get started with Bala. I'll come to you first, if that's okay. So we, again, on the examples, visible examples, most visible examples of how traditional infrastructure models have failed women, people with disability, indigenous people, and other marginalized communities during climate disasters. What are the most kind of striking examples that you can give us? Yes.
See is people with disabilities have very diverse needs, but our imaginations and action is very much limited to thinking about ramps, handrails, and elevators. And we don't really think much beyond that. Similarly, when we think about open spaces, we always consider the limitations in terms of making parks, playgrounds into accessible as an excuse to also exclude people with disabilities from those spaces. Example, during the COVID-19 pandemic, we saw how people were craving to go outdoors. People were really wanting to spend time with their family outdoors. But then that is not an option for many people with disabilities on an everyday life. And multiple research shows that people with disabilities are forced to spend more time indoors, primarily due to the external physical barriers that they have to face. So these are two primary sectors where they are challenged on an everyday basis, and more so during the climate emergencies. And I'd like to kind of conclude with our current research, which is on 6 cities globally.
Have you got a slide for this? Or?
Oh yeah, please.
Yep.
So I'd like to also mention our current research on 6 cities globally. We have done a 4-year research looking at case studies from 6 cities across the globe and have prepared a global action report. So this specifically highlights 10 principles for inclusive cities and also 16 action areas where there is need for more work to be done. You can also scan the QR code to read the report. From that perspective, it's important that the failure of our infrastructure is not only like addressed through the disability inclusion lens in a superficial way, but by co-creating the infrastructure with people with disabilities themselves. Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, I'm coming to you, Uzo, with a similar question. Have you got any more examples you want to share? Not just, the challenges, but, like if you want to maybe also give us some hope. It's just that this is actually some good work is being done on this.
Yes, indeed, and thank you very much for having us and for taking this topic to the fore, bringing it to the fore. So I'm Uzoamaka Nwamarah. I'm with the Commonwealth Secretariat. The Commonwealth is 56 member countries, and just reflecting on this topic today, I would start by saying that when it comes to inclusivity, this is at the core of what we do. So at the level of the Commonwealth, we have 4 gender equality principles, looking at women in economic empowerment, women in leadership, no to violence against women and girls, and then climate change and gender. We also have the Commonwealth Disabled People's Forum, and then at the Commonwealth Heads of Government meetings, we always have a standing Women's Forum and Youth Forum. So at the highest level, this topic is there, and then it cascades down to the ministerial level, wherein we have the Commonwealth Women's Affairs Ministers meeting, our Commonwealth Youth Ministers. In fact, our Commonwealth is celebrating 50 years for young people, Year of Youth. Now, to your question, we also have our Commonwealth Climate Finance Access Hub, and all of these initiatives work together. So within the section where I work, we have our Commonwealth Climate Finance Access Hub, where we embed long-term experts in line ministries to support with climate finance access, but everything else within the climate finance loop, be it developing the climate finance policies, the strategies, the finance units, developing those projects. And this is where we now come into infrastructure. Now, with the advisors, we do have the national advisors, as mentioned, embedded in ministries. We also have regional advisors who are embedded in institutions at the regional level. And last year, we then had thematic advisors, so on gender and health, embedded in the hub. And I'm joined here today with our regional advisor and gender climate finance advisor. Now, when we respond to our country requests and needs, we then work together with them and ensure that gender and youth, GEDSI, is engaged and mainstream throughout. But also we have focused projects, policies that have GEDSI as the primary focus for which we're accessing finance. And I want to highlight this point because it's not either or. We need to make sure that all the projects we're working on have GEDSI mainstreamed, and then we also need to make sure we have projects that have GEDSI as the focus. And this way, we ensure that we are mainstreaming, we ensure that we are focused, we're targeted. So some of the examples I can share, and your question, indeed, when you're designing policy or projects, beyond just bringing stakeholders to the table, you need to make sure you're designing with their lived realities in mind. And not only designing, but taking them through the whole stages of infrastructure development, be it conceiving the infrastructure, designing it, implementing it, and like you said, if there's a disaster, to make sure it can bounce back. You need to make sure you take everybody through the process. Now, some key examples. In Tonga, we had worked with the Disabled People's Organization there to give them capacity building for readiness. And our advisor, so the Commonwealth National Climate Finance Advisor for Tonga, worked with them and applied to the GCF and received funding for this particular project. So they've worked hand in hand with them such that they're able to design those projects that, like I mentioned, are targeted and focused on them. So that's there. We build that capacity in there. In Jamaica, we did get funding for their policy, and so our advisor in Jamaica did get funding to develop a early warning systems, when you're disseminating information to alert people about incoming climate risks, is usually over the radio, which is fine. But what about those who are hard to hear or have hearing impairments? What then happens? Another project we've done in Maldives, we may know that Maldives has an atoll of over 1,200 islands, but so this is geographic location as well, and even just things about how do you cascade information in a timely manner and making sure that it's not only those who are active in the main city, the capital, that have access to this information. So one thing to just highlight and say what we're looking ahead going forward, we did do research and engage across board stakeholders, and we had the Women's Affairs Minister's request for a community of practice. And in here, we did get representation from the Commonwealth DPO as mentioned, and we're happy to say that the Commonwealth Collaborative Network is looking at 3 key areas, so data, climate finance, and then decision making, and we made sure that GEDSI is across board in all of them. So thank you.
Wow, that's it's amazing how many examples. I mean, it's and the fact that GEDSI is like at the highest level is a standing item is really wonderful. Really leadership from the Commonwealth Secretariat and the Commonwealth in general. So thank you for sharing this, Uzo. So as I said, we are wanting to obviously give a little bit more, expand a little bit more on the kind of nexus climate and GEDSI inclusivity, because that's kind of what our report looked at and tried to exemplify. I mean, climate exacerbates, the vulnerability already exists. But my question is a little bit like, how can we, how does inclusivity strengthen climate resilience and adaptation? How can how can that be, like the inclusivity can be a factor that strengthens the climate resilience and adaptation? So should I maybe come to Sanae first or Marcia? The closest to the microphone. Okay.
Thank you very much. Nice question. I'm Sanae Okamoto, senior researcher from United Nations University. I'd like to maybe share some example. The project I have been involved in, it's in Buenos Aires in Argentina, and the informal settlement called the Barrio 20, and then that's 30,000 people, 30,000 people living, and then there are like some, we have done some survey, informal survey, and sorry. Okay. Okay. So they're like about 20% of mental disorders and visual impairment of people, like 70%, and the audio, the motor-related disability people, also like 20-30%, and then another remaining people who has disabilities are having multiple, like combined disorders. It's about 5,000 people. We recognized the having disability in that region, and we identified 5 challenges. One is like the region is very vulnerable to heat waves and floodings, and then that's also they are already living in the environment which is very vulnerable to climate risks, but also like the environment is informal settlement. So there are so many inaccessible places for like evacuating or taking shelters. And another thing is these people with disabilities are often like systematically facing the social exclusion for especially decision making, and that also contains like the planning, city planning, and also the evacuation, and also the disaster preparedness planning decisions. All kinds of things they are not considered as the core decision makers. And this kind of things also, like we looked into some global preparedness for the disaster gap, and 71% of the people with disabilities, it's like doesn't have individual preparedness for the disasters, but then 85% of them doesn't have someone who helps to evacuate in case of disasters. But then still 1.3 billion people in worldwide has disabilities, which is one person in 6 people having the severe disabilities. So that's why this kind of things need to have really considered into the spectrum of all the disaster risk management. And we developed like 3 pillars for improving this situation. And one is the social infrastructure, which is focusing on people and capacity and leadership. So we try to include these people with disabilities as core leaders of this decision making. So not as passive beneficiaries, but as city makers. And we have access to the Action City Lab in the Buenos Aires, and we discussed what we can do. And we also discussed what kind of capacity building program we can co-create. And that way, people also learn how to co-create, co-design, and how to improve and implement the ideas they came up with. So this is a bit more holistic, and the whole process we try to combine the people from people with disabilities. And the pillar 2 is digital infrastructures. So this is focusing on more like accessibility, accessible technology and data. So we are trying to develop the AI-assisted tools, which using the natural language processing tools, like also recognize voice, but also the text, and then like live updated information about the challenges for accessing to the evacuation shelters. So sometimes in case of flooding, the road get blocked, or some area get some cases like something broken and so on. I'm from Japan, so I experience a lot of flooding, but typhoon and earthquakes, I know how chaotic the situation can be. And then even like a secured route, cannot be accessible. And also like if the steps or some ramps are broken, bridges are broken, this kind of things need to be updated, like live update is very much needed. And another thing is like developing a digital repository about all the information and also the knowledge base. These are things we wanted to develop in the digital infrastructure. And the third one is spatial infrastructure. So this is also like focusing on the physical space, but also universal design. And one is also we try to include nature-based solution, and then to make sure like environment is always considered in the urban city planning, but also universal design, like tactile pavement, or like support for the audio and visual images for people to understand which way they need to go, what type of things they need to take with when they are evacuating. And also the different type of like evacuation method, like the different type of evacuation method, but also try to make sure that evacuated the shelter you have in the city is safe and functional. So because if the evacuation center or shelter is unsafe or doesn't have any infrastructure like going to the bathroom or water and some basic food, then people cannot stay there longer, and also people cannot feel safe to get there. So these kind of things need to be considered, and these 3 infrastructure we want to develop in this project. And for this, we are trying to make sure this is accessible for everyone, but also low cost, and also like scalable with a community-based approach. And these are the things we have been trying to achieve in the last years. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sanae, for sharing this, and highlighting the role of data and technology as well that can have in boosting how we can integrate that inclusivity and combat climate change and make sure that we are not really leaving people behind. Marcia, you want to add anything?
Yes. First of all, congratulations for the report, because it's very critical that we can more and more identify opportunities to incorporate inclusivity in all climate action, especially infrastructure. Many examples for that. I'm happy to share a couple of perspectives. First, from the side of the Race to Resilience campaign, which is a non-state actor campaign mobilizing more than 40 partners, about 1,700 members working in 165 countries. And the Race to Resilience delivered results after 4 years of work from pledges to plans, from plans to implementation. In the COP of implementation, we're very keen to really showcase how inclusivity, a people-centric metric, track progress of people enhancing resilience, actually is critical and matters. And many of the examples very much highlight the opportunity by already shared a few of those examples is when risk is being exposed, when one understands the risk and find the best ways to address it that can also serve different populations, different communities, different stakeholders, especially the most vulnerable, women, girls, people with disability, or other contexts. So not only is the risk and then the planning and maybe risk response, but also with time understanding the value, the additional value that generates when one invests and also adopt measures that can be inclusive. So it's that whole value chain, this whole cycle that matters. Is the risk reduction, is responsiveness to the most vulnerable, but it's also that additional value that perhaps was not so evidently at the beginning, but can help reinforce and even improve the next, let's say, wave or cycle of actions. And in that purpose, then ensures that the investments and the solutions that have been identified are used, are adopted, are co-created perhaps in many cases, and will receive the inputs of the right populations so that they can be part of it. And through that is not only serving, but is engaging with the different groups and communities. And a way of the cooperation is also an opportunity to create the trust and build social cohesion that is critical for adaptation and resilience. So sometimes one will think, oh, it's just a material issue. It's not a material issue. It's also a living issue. It really has to do with the social dynamics, with the social cohesion, the social safety nets, and that space of generation of trust is as well what we've observed is helpful for recognizing the opportunity on resilience, and in that sense connecting also with justice issues. No? And what we are right now in the action agenda, COP30 has brought a, let's say, evolved framework on an action agenda, very much to respond to global stocktake. So this is excellent because we want to implement, we want to advance acceleration of action. Then we need to look at what are this progress against the global stocktake, and that means what are the barriers that are still not letting the mainstreaming of those critical solutions. And by looking at the barriers or as well the enablers, we can also see how bringing inclusivity, bringing a people lens still needs to be mainstream. And the action agenda is, with the Race to Resilience and other initiatives, also putting people at the center. You have seen probably the letter 5th, which places people at the center of climate action, and the letter 8th of the presidency that elevates adaptation as an opportunity to bring and very clearly not only think about one dimension of inclusivity and resilience, but inclusivity is across. No? Axis 1, which is in energy, industry, transport. Axis 2, which is nature, enormous opportunity and clarity of course, bring inclusivity as well there. Axis 3 on food, 4 on human settlements, which we are very much probably related to. Axis 5, which is all about human and social dimension. So again, bringing inclusivity not only in one dimension but across is where we are really keen and want to do more, I would say. There is still quite a lot to do, and we can talk about then what needs to happen to mainstream even more.
Is this like a power of nature unleashing on us? Is it like it's just the noise? Okay, all right. Okay, thank you, Marcia. So ICSI is, if you can hear me when I speak, ICSI is a proud partner of the Race to Resilience. We've been from the very beginning, and this report that we publish every year is actually one of our main contributions to the race to resilience. And every year we sort of count the number of people that through the examples that we curate and collate. So this year is the tally of number of people made more resilient through the case studies in the report is 36 millions. Of course, there are many more examples. It's not that that report is exhaustive by no all means. And so, like many more people are, are being made more resilient as we speak, through the work that we already do. So let's be positive. We are already implementing, perhaps not at the speed and scale needed, but we are already making progress. And so I think we should be positive and acknowledge and celebrate progress as well. And there is the next question is still on examples. So more examples coming. I think this time is what is GEDSI responsive infrastructure look like? So just again, more examples where there's been some successful implementation of this in infrastructure, and including from the start, in the different projects or examples that you're going to share. So coming back to you, Bala, for a little bit more on examples.
Thank you. When you ask for examples, I think before getting into the specific examples, something I want to kind of lay out is what we really mean by successful GEDSI responsive infrastructure. Really. Like from a people with disabilities perspective, it means that it allows or enables people with disabilities to make decisions independently. It allows them to kind of change their, let's say, travel plans midway without having to think about the barriers ahead. And also it's something that allows them to run their everyday life as well as navigate climate emergencies without having to wait for help. So that's the crux that we want to address when we say GEDSI responsive infrastructure. So the examples are minimal from what we have done and what we have seen so far, but coming from India, I also know why it's difficult to do what has to be done. Like I want to highlight two specific examples. One is, which is in action, the London Olympic Park, where we are currently stationed. The Global Disability Innovation Hub is currently operating from the London Olympic Park itself, and we were part of the planning process from the very beginning, even before the Olympics was started. So even the design standards is now live online as a living document. We keep updating them, even though the implementation got over like years back. So which has like specific recommendations across all the scales of the work, from site planning to even designing specific for street furniture to signages to providing, let's say, dog assisted facilities for people with impairments. So that level of detailing has been done. So that's one example how you can embed inclusive design from your site planning to end, and also how you can activate accessibility panels as part of the process throughout. So that's one. And second example I want to speak about is more from the research and investigation perspective, because what we also observe is a lot of time people with disabilities or any of the marginalized groups are actually consulted only the halfway through the project. Once we already have defined our questions, once we have created our plans, we go to get opinions. But that's not how it should be ideally working out. So in our inclusive infrastructure research, what we do is we start off from framing the questions with people with disabilities. So we have workshops, we have like multiple activities including photo diaries, practical mapping, shadowing, and also like doing like multiple focus group discussions in an accessible format, so that to take their input across the process. And most importantly, we want to ensure the feedback loops are closed always. So people with disabilities, after they give their valuable insights, are also aware how those insights are taken forward to the next stage. So they don't think that we only listen to them, but we don't really act on them. So that's another important aspect to be considered when we say GEDSI responsive infrastructure.
Thank you. And this kind of co-creation and inclusive participation is coming out. Every one of you is like mentioning this, and you're making such an important point. This is not just a one-off. You're just consulting with them and bringing them to the table. Tick off and a tick box exercise, and it's like it needs to be iterative, right? Or loop. There needs to be a loop, because otherwise it's not meaningful.
Yeah. I also was going to add one small thing, since you brought about participatory approaches. Another very nuanced kind of observation we have is a lot of organizations are looking at participatory approaches, participatory activities, but by that definition, it's not necessarily inclusive. Let's say you do a participatory workshop in a venue which is not even accessible, then your intention is very, at the basic level, is shattered. So just participation isn't really enough. We also have to make it inclusive and accessible at every level, intentionally.
And and as you mentioned this, I know that certain colors shouldn't be used on slides, right? To make it more inclusive.
Of course.
Because people could be colorblind. It's just so many things that when we think about inclusivity, right, that we need to be thinking about. Uzo, coming to you, and then I'll actually want to hear from you, Ula, because you've been very patient so far.
Thank you so much. I'll continue that train of thought, but I'll be looking at two things: whole of society approach, as well as nature, nature-based solutions. So when we talk about inclusive infrastructure, there's an aspect that we also need to look at. I think we've touched on, mobility. We've touched on, participation. I also want to touch on cultural sensitivity, because when we say whole of society, who is the infrastructure for? What are we building for? And if the people are not part of the process from the onset, as Bala mentioned, then the likelihood of getting the infrastructure to be fit for purpose and then the ownership, we lose that. So it's really important for us to understand the benefits overall, because we are building for the long term, and that's key. And this then brings me to the indigenous knowledge, because many times when we talk about infrastructure, we look at hard infrastructure, which is fine, but we need to make sure that we're building on indigenous knowledge that's available, marrying the two as well, making sure we maximize the synergies therein. Now, the work I had mentioned earlier, where we had supported with the early warning system approach in Namibia, something that is important to note about culture. Many times people think pastoralists are men, but we did do a mapping of the different counties in the area. We found out that in some of the traditional areas, for some sects, it was the females that were in charge of the animals and going outwards, which was interesting. So we need to also understand that when you do this mapping, understanding the cultural sensitivity and the people therein is important. Another example to share is in Fiji, where we have supported, and this is coming to nature. So nature-based solutions are also infrastructure for us as well. And it's important for us to engage the communities, engage everybody. Many times the leadership are the chiefs, usually men, but you also have the women that understand, like I said, indigenous water flows. You are able to have accurate, more efficient solutions in themselves. So when we worked on the nature-based seawalls, we worked with everybody, including young people, and I think that's something to really draw from, to understand that you also have soft infrastructure as well. That is not hard infrastructure, and building on the community level intelligence as well. Thank you.
Thank you for bringing up nature, because as I am borrowing from someone, Professor Seddon from Oxford University, she's a great advocate for nature. And she said, climate justice is not credible if there's no equity or inclusivity and justice. But also it's not feasible without nature. Climate action is not feasible without nature. We are, people-centered also means nature. Nature is part of the equation. We are nature. We are part of nature. So thank you for sharing this. So Ula, coming to you. So switching gear a little bit, because we are now going to more towards the kind of the levers, because this is more implementation examples and so forth. But what do we need? We need an enabling environment for this. We need the policies and regulations. And so, what can you tell us? What can you share about how can the policies and regulation help us embed these GEDSI principles?
Thank you very much. And just to introduce myself, I work for C40 Cities and GCoM joint program. So those two organizations sort of joining the forces to cover both the big cities, but also the smaller towns and cities around the world. And we support the Coalition for High Ambition Multi-Level Partnerships. It's a mouthful, but in essence, it's a coalition of countries. Like you see here on the stream, we have 77 plus EU. And those countries basically committed to work with their subnational lower levels of governments to advance climate action. Why this is so important is because in many countries around the world, the power to regulate and to set taxes or to govern is devolved. So not everything happens from the national perspective, but it is devolved to your state level or to your municipality, to the county, to the town or to the city. And very often, actually, the decisions that we have been talking about here are not taken by the national government, they are actually taken at the local level. So many of those countries, many of those localities are the ones making those decisions. And you know, the national governments often set the frameworks that should guide the decision making, but we are seeing that not always they are providing the capacity at the local level to be actually able to implement those frameworks. So that's one of the things that we are observing and trying to address is the capacity at the local level, so that all of the consultations that have been mentioned, all of the participatory processes, they all require work from the government to be able to do it. The decisions around the venue choice, the food that is being served. If the local government is under-resourced, they often make the, you know, they try to have good intentions, but sometimes it just doesn't work because they don't have that ability to make those decisions. So it all comes down to that flow of resource and capacity from national or local level. And one example that I want to bring forward here is the procurement. It's very boring. I'm so sorry. This was so inspiring, and I'm now talking about
one of my favorite topics.
Procurement.
Thank you.
Because many of the local governments are responsible for purchasing the benches, the lights, paying those bills, and they actually have power to set the parameters around the procurement contracts. And so what we have been working on with GCoM and with organizations here is really try to see how we can write toolkits and advice for those governments, so that when they design the procurement contract, they set those requirements of, okay, you are designing this neighborhood. You need to include the local disabled people's organization in that design, for example. You have to consult the women's safety group. And all of those things are part of the procurement contract. And if those are not delivered by the contractor, we will withhold 15% of the final payment, because you have not fulfilled the contractual agreement that was set. So, you know, those are the examples that are quite interesting. And similarly, and this is also to address one of your questions before, how do we bridge the nexus of infrastructure, climate, and inclusivity? Many of the municipalities have climate action plans, and we are seeing more and more of those climate action plans being developed. So in Ukraine, Covenant of Mayors initiative, the Covenant of Mayors saw that there is a mandated framework from the national government to develop gender-responsive documents. Not just one document, but just overall the documents that are prepared by the municipalities have to be gender-responsive. And so what happened is that they took this direction and ensured that all of the climate plans, the energy and climate action plans, are indeed reflecting those gender equity principles. And I will give you the final examples from my previous work. I also work in the energy department and worked on the regulation of heating systems. And we were doing impact assessments of what would happen if you remove the gas connection from some neighborhoods, because you would be electrifying the entire neighborhood, and you electrify it and remove the gas connection completely. And in one of our group sessions where we were inviting different communities to speak with them, we've discovered that it would have impact on cooking, because many groups actually use gas for their traditional foods. They need gas for cooking certain breads and all of those items. And none of the people in our team had really thought about that before. And that's, I think, it's really highlighting the importance of doing those consultations, because sometimes you don't know what you don't know. And when you are an official sitting in a city, you may have the best intentions, but you will just not know all the variety of considerations. And that's why all those assessments are so important, and consulting with the groups is so important. But it does take resources, that does take time. And this is where we sometimes have the balance, and you will be sometimes frustrated with bureaucracy, and I have been too, but sometimes it takes time because there is a time needed for those consultations. So the NTC is here, the all of the documents. Everyone wants to have them now, but they cannot really happen now because in that case, the consultation would have not happened because it takes time to actually prepare it with care. So it's a bit of a push and pull, but I think that's really something I wanted to highlight is the governments may have good intentions, and sometimes it's just down to the resources or simply lack of knowledge, and that's something we are trying to address through our initiatives. And the report that you highlighted as well, all of those resources are directed to those officials who really try to make the good step forward and make decisions better.
Thank you. That's probably one of the most, I wasn't expecting you to bring up procurement, but that's one of my national favorite, topics because it's such a powerful lever and it's boring. It's not sexy. It's like maintaining infrastructure. It's not sexy. It's terrible, but it doesn't get the spotlight, but it's such an important action you can take, right? Thank you. And highlighting also the local level capacity again, a great point. Thank you. Okay, so we are almost to the end of this panel. It's gone so fast, and we are a bit ambitious on the number of questions. But before I go back to my panelists, because I want to ask them all one last question, like a bit of a round robin. It's always good for people to go away from panels with something, one thing, like that you want people to take away in terms of action to be taken. So I'm coming back to you, but before I do, I'd like to open to questions or comments from the audience, because the audience, again, let's be inclusive in this session and then give people an opportunity to participate and to share their thoughts. And anyone who wants to tell us, yes.
Good afternoon. I hope you can hear me. Once again, I'm Nancy Omolo and I'm from Commonwealth. Actually, we work very closely with Uzo. So she's given a number of examples of resilient infrastructure from Commonwealth. And one of them we worked on is on health. How do you ensure that health is accessible to everyone in the society? But I would just like to go a bit different and give some of my examples beyond Commonwealth. For example, you talked about the procurement. So basically, I come from Kenya, and one of the government rules is that when you're doing procurement, around 30% of the government procurement goes to people with disability, the youth, and for women. And sometimes when we are implementing World Bank projects, the people who will provide us the food and the teas, they have to be women organizations. So, so that was embedded in that kind of system. And I also did a research which covered Ethiopia, Congo, Brazzaville, Kenya, and Ethiopia. I looked at 4 institutions on how they are mainstreaming the GEDSI. And they said that as much as they would like, most of them actually were not doing it, but as much as they would like, because I asked, have you employed people with disability, living with disability? And they said no, but they said it's very expensive. For example, if you bring someone on a wheelchair, when you're having conferences or going to the airport, you have to make arrangements so that the airport can take care of them. If you're going to the hotels, you have to ensure that those hotels can take care of those people. What is the level of maybe like the tables? Can they do things by themselves than someone going to serve them? And it goes beyond just the physical disability that you can see. What about if you employ someone with autism? Have you also trained people within your institution to be able to handle someone with autism? Because, for example, if we have in our institution somebody with autism, I can't call the person in a very noisy place. And it also goes to something we talked about, disability and green space. Which kind of space are you going to have for such people, that environment? So when you look at that GEDSI infrastructure, it's about, you're looking at it in terms of energy, in terms of health, and what about even in terms of office spaces, and what about the invisible disability? Thank you.
Thank you. We got one comment here and later.
Thank you very much for an interesting and interactive discussion. I'm Dudu Sbia from South Africa. I think I'm so interested on Urszula. I noticed that the COP30, basically we put the element that my colleague has mentioned as just like a tick off box. Tick, 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 tick. They were women, they've done that and that. But the quality that is attached to that, it's not there. So how can we standardize to have sort of like a qualitative thing rather than quantitative element that is going to come out of that?
Not sure. Any one who wants to make a comment?
I can try. It's hard to make it qualitative and actually not the tick box exercise, especially when there are time limits set. And I think that's been something that we've been really trying to do. So what we do at C40 and GCoM, we run a lot of programs in our Inclusive Climate Action Program, where we train the officials at the local level. So trying to avoid having, for example, consultants coming in, doing it, and then going out, and you have no knowledge that's left in the organization. And I think that's something we've been trying to do, is really to make sure that there is a local staff being trained, because then you retain the connection with the community. You bring them, you meet them, and you maintain the contact. And I think, as you were saying with the London Olympic Village, you create a report by which you may be able to come back. And I think that's also, when you develop a standard, what you should be remembering to do is to come back, to create something that adds that layer. Okay, you've done it once, but you should probably review it in a year's time, or in 2 years' time, or in 6 months' time. Is this still relevant? It's also important because governments change, elections happen, and if you don't have that, well, then the other administration may have a different priority. So that's, I would say that's my answer, but I'm sure that colleagues here have plenty of better answers.
Another way to incorporate qualitative measures is to actually, as you said, not only look at the quantitative KPIs to see ticked off the box if it's happening and in which way, but also how, and there is methodologies. The Race to Resilience, for example, has worked in a metrics framework that incorporates both quantitative and qualitative, because it matters how was engaged those groups, in which ways, where co-creation was locally led, had a gender lens, used traditional knowledge, and many other variables that can help. And also capacity was increased, because capacity tends to be everywhere. Everybody says we need capacity, but it's really critical, and otherwise we will not accelerate. The other one is sometimes, and this is very much in the spirit of COP30 Buchirao, is many of the opportunities are also when multiple stakeholders work together. So private sector or communities and subnational governments bring different perspectives, and therefore they can see the gaps, they can see the opportunities as well, on how to better enhance that those solutions can be sustained. The critical part of that is how to address as well access to finance in a way that different groups can have the quality of the solutions and infrastructure needed, but not necessarily be dependent. They can also organize and have opportunities to access finance for complementing, in that sense, the larger infrastructure, if it's going to be, in this case, planned by the city level or by other contractors. But yeah.
Am I audible? Yeah, a very quick comment. This comes based on the work that we have been doing, and I have been doing in my capacity even before I joined CDRI, because I had a long career with UN. I think the two major challenges is the data, because unless and until we have the data, it is very difficult to take any decision. Currently, I come from India. The data itself is a big challenge. There is no proper data available at a granular level, so that you can expect this, infrastructure agencies or policymakers to take the right decision. Number one. Number two, I think, as I mentioned in the very beginning, we are looking at a framework. We are saying capacity to absorb, respond, and recover. Even if, when I say capacity to absorb, is okay, fine. We are designing a school, we try to address the issues related to inclusion and disability. But unless and until the people who are they're managing the school are well oriented on what do we mean by inclusivity, what do we mean by inclusion, they won't be able to measure implement any measures. It's not only about having ramps or in schools. It is about making those children feel inclusive in that environment. Then only actually real inclusivity happens. And that's why we have been working with infrastructure agencies on coming up with the disaster preparedness and response plans. So when they do that, they really need to know who are the vulnerable groups, where they are located, what kind of services are needed, and then only we can say that the infrastructure is resilient. So I think it's important to mention these two. I thought it's important to mention. Thank you.
I know we've got one final comment in the room, maybe. No? Yes, and then we come back to you. Be patient and then come back. Prepare your 1 point.
So I'm Nidhi Nagapatla. I'm the head of the program on nature, climate and health. And one quick point I'd like to make is that is from my experience in Geneva when we were attending the Global Disaster Risk Platform. And we were trying to take a colleague with disability from her hotel to the point of meeting. And we noted that the Swiss government has a bus or transport infrastructure. However, not every bus or every train has that facility. And I think if existing information can be then digitized to facilitate people, like AI-based system of this bus number will have or not have. So I think to set prototypes, that could be a guiding framework for other countries and communities to then replicate or upscale. So there are these promising examples somewhere that needs to be upscaled to fit the context of DRR and DRM. And I hope then it can be then scaled with a cost-benefit analysis. And the cost part still remains rather unclear.
That was,
I hope my point was clear.
No. It's just the sky is open on your point. So I think you're making a good point on retrofitting, infrastructure that was not designed that way is super. I mean, retrofitting infrastructure for resilience is already not done. Imagine retrofitting infrastructure for inclusivity. It's just on the priority list of retrofitting infrastructure. Unfortunately, what we need to do is finding the opportunity to do it all in one go, right? When we go and retrofit, you do all of these things in one go, and you do it efficiently. I think that's an important point. So, going back to my panel, asking you to just a super quick, good point, good point, hopefully, on that people can take away from this as a action that could be implemented. Ula.
Procurement. Look into procurement. I'm sorry to say it again, but if you are working with the governments, tell them. Have you looked at your procurement? Is it fit for purpose? Did you mainstream GEDSI in it? And if you haven't, why not? And when are you going to do it? Because that's really something that can provide you a quick win, in our opinion.
In the COP of implementation, I have to definitely focus on the opportunity how do we track progress and therefore has inclusive approaches to risk assessment and recognizing the needs and the vulnerability of different groups, but as well how we track progress, what has worked. Is so important to know how many people are benefiting and in which ways are benefiting, so that we can actually help mainstream those approaches, those solutions, those partnerships and collaboration across multiple actors and across multiple sectoral stakeholders.
So from my end, we currently have hundreds of cities creating local climate action plans, like C40 would know that. But what we often see is, in the complexity of GEDSI, sometimes the D gets dissolved or kind of get invisible. So we really encourage city governments and practitioners to look at disability targeted programs and policies, till the point we actually reach a disability confidence among cities. Currently, we see that gender is very much understood broadly. People know what we mean by gender inclusion, But when we say disability inclusion, people don't know where to start with. So we really encourage disability-targeted solutions and policies. On that note, a very quick update. We are working on a 2-year project starting from this January, looking at a pilot inclusive cities infrastructure work in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, where there is a real opportunity to test some of these ideas. So if any of you already are working in Addis Ababa or have plans to work in the next 2 years, please reach out to us. We'd be happy to partner and then see how to take it forward.
So my call to action is for us to bridge the knowledge gap on the gendered impacts on climate change. So pretty much data. And this comes from work that we've done. We did look at all the Commonwealth member NDCs, and we found out that data, gender disaggregated data, was a key element. So there is data available, there are solutions available, but how do we capture this data in a meaningful manner such that we can synthesize it, analyze it, and use it to inform our decision making? So we're also pleased to show an example. We did receive a request, and we've launched this here at COP, where we worked with the government of Nigeria for establishing a national data hub for gender and climate information. And this is the first of its kind. It then comes to the capacity building we're talking about, both human but institutional. So this is going to be a policy link platform that collects that data, synthesizes it, harmonizes it, analyzes, and also disseminates it in a format in which it is useful as well. So data.
I'm fully with you. I also would like to say data. Data is very important. Without the data, we cannot develop a policy, we cannot develop a standard, anything. But then we also need to think about what type of data we have. So this aggregated data is a very big issue. Also, gender domain, we always talk about this gender disaggregated data, but also this disaggregated beneficiary data. I think we should really understand and capture this. And also different types of disabilities, but also if we consider difficulties of understanding any information. For example, I'm Japanese, I'm living in the Netherlands. If any emergency news alert comes in Dutch, and spoken Dutch or written Dutch, I don't think I can quickly understand. So that's also like migration status also matters so much. But also like data collection in this sentence, context is always social interaction, data collection and social interaction. So that's we need to quantify it, but then qualitative data is coming from trust and the participation and the social norms. So this kind of things, so holistic understanding of data, how to analyze data, how to collect the data, and how to utilize data. So as we talked about it, different difficulties with hearing and like vision and also understanding languages, these kind of things always need to be considered to develop new interventions. Thank you very much.
All right, so we're a little over time, so thank you for hosting us again, Ranjini and CDRI. We've come to the end of this panel. Thank you, panelists, so much for your contributions. Let's give them a round of applause. Thank you, audience. Those of you in the audience who've listened to all of this, hopefully it was interesting. It was full of examples, packed full of examples, and so that's things are happening. We should just really scale them up and connect them a lot better. Can you go next slide, please? And then a final reminder on this report. I know this will be shared widely. I hope again, everyone is taking a look at this and finds it inspiring. So thank you again, and enjoy the rest of your COP.